Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. As many of my viewers know, I like to often interview fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who've shared my experience within the Jehovah's Witness religion. Today, I won't be doing that. I'll be interviewing someone with an entirely different cult background. Sarah Edmondson is a Canadian actress who starred in the CBS series Salvation and more than 12 films for the Hallmark Channel and Lifetime. She's also a well-established and talented voiceover artist, and she has a story to tell about NXIVM. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Have I pronounced it correctly? NXIVM, it's letters, isn't it? Like Latin letters or something.
It was made up by the founder. It's not a real word. There is a heartburn medication called NXIVM, and I believe that's how it's pronounced. But when we joined, I was joining a program called Executive Success Programs, or ESP, but now the world knows it as NXIVM, so we can go with that.
Indeed. I would imagine Executive Success Program does it a bit more flattery than it's worth. But yes. Nonetheless, it's a fascinating group. It's one that's sort of been on my radar. I'm aware that there have been some truly outrageous stories emanating out of this group, which we'll almost certainly get into. How did you come to be involved to begin with?
Well, I was a sort of stereotypical aspiring actress looking for more purpose and meaning in my life. I ended up at a film festival where I met a director who got a sense of who I was and said, you might like this program that I just took called, ESP, Executive Success. And truthfully, I didn't do any homework. I didn't Google it until I'd already started. But I trusted him and I wanted to work with him, and I wanted to he'd made a film called What the Bleep Do We Know, which was a hugely successful, one of the top grossing documentaries of all time at that time. And I just figured this was a great way to be a part of a community that was in line with who I am and my values, and make conscious shifting media. And that's how that was my hook. And it turned out to be a personal development program on the outside, and then on the inside, as we found out later, it was a highly abusive, I use the word cult, but that word is, has different meanings for different people. There are checklists that match my experience, but it is a high control group at the core.
Indeed. And what I've found, speaking to people from different groups, and, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is because obviously in my work, I'm used to dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses and, the unique areas of abuse within that group. But what you often find when you look at other groups is that kind of whirring away under the hood is the exact same machinery, even if the bodywork looks a bit different. The beliefs might be different, the theology, the policies, what have you. But ultimately, there are the same methods of control and manipulation going on underneath. It's very, very useful to be able to kind of bring in people from different groups or who have backgrounds in different groups so that we can understand how universal this is. It's not just purely about, Jehovah's Witnesses are the only group doing this. Mm-hmm. There are any number of iterations of the same methods of manipulation. Right. I understand in NXIVM, you sort of rose a bit within the ranks, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I rose pretty quickly. There was a time when I was, just a student, but I decided pretty quickly that I wanted to be a coach, and eventually I wanted to bring it to Vancouver, which I did. And I was very much nurtured and became a bit of a poster child for the organization as somebody who was willing to work really hard. And I did. I hustled and put my, everything, all my energy into building the center in Vancouver, which was a really beautiful little group. Unfortunately, we had to destroy it when I figured out what was happening at the mothership. But our center in Vancouver was this very lovely little community of people who wanted to work on their goals and support each other and be the best versions of themselves and all that stuff. But to your point about the template of abuse, this book has been really helpful in my healing. Take Back Your Life.
Indeed, I have that. Yeah, it's a brilliant book.
Yanya was a guest on our podcast. I recommend her for yours as well. But she talks about the cookie cutter template, and that there's this sort of, for all the leaders, they have the same kind of messiah complex, narcissistic, sociopathic, often sex addicted. I know that's slightly different for yours, but both, it seems to be a really ripe ground for abuse.
Indeed. Well, on the sex addicted part, I mean, you can sort of make a little bit of a case for that with the earlier leaders. There were scandals surrounding the founders, or the founder, Charles Taze Russell. There was a notorious jellyfish story about his interactions with a girl who was staying at his house while he was married. And there were also rumors about his successor keeping mistresses. Nothing concrete. But arguably, the way the organization went was to kind of overly clamp down on all of those skeletons in the closet by introducing this culture of kind of over sexual repression, if that makes sense, to the point when there is absolutely no sexuality allowed and everything has to be firmly shut in the closet. So I think sexuality does often factor in various ways. Yeah. But so when you were kind of rising in the ranks, were there any red flags? I mean, you've mentioned there like narcissistic leader. Did you not see anything like that in the behavior of the leader?
Yeah, I had a lot of red flags right from the beginning. The problem, though, in terms of how that was negated, was that right from the beginning of my very first 5-day, the leaders were taught to lead the participants in a process, which basically sounded like, after introductions and everything, asking why people showed up and why they were there, they would say, we're here to talk about your issues and talk about the things you're challenged by. So it's going to be natural that you're going to have the urge to bolt, the urge to leave. And that's just your body trying to protect you and protect those issues. And we all paid a lot of money, right? And all successful people want to look at the areas where they need to grow. So when you hit those areas, it's going to be uncomfortable. And we just ask you that you don't leave, and you work through those things with a coach or a facilitator, and we'll help you through them. So it sounds very reasonable and very loving and very compassionate and very helpful. But what it is the first step in saying you're going to have a gut instinct that something's not right. And we're asking you to override that. And truthfully, in almost every training, there was somebody who left at that point. Because the very first module, the very first class, is a number of things that lay out all the weird things that we did in NXIVM. We call the leader Vanguard. Okay. And that would be explained with a very simple thing. Well, we call the judge your honor. We call a doctor your doctor. Call your doctor. We call, names for different ranks in the military. Vanguard means leader of a philosophical movement. What's so weird about that? Right. And
it doesn't, though, really, does it? It has kind of science fiction undertones. It is
totally science fiction. And there were people that'd be like, can I swear on this?
Sure.
Yeah, they'd be like, fuck this. This is weird, especially if they've been in any background. Like I had actually at one point tried to recruit our mutual friend whose background is JW. And he was like, listen, I like you. I like the people involved. I like, what you're trying to tell me this does. But like I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and this is bringing up a lot of red flags for me. So people who had that background were more educated as to some of those things, where somebody like me, I didn't have any experience like that. I hadn't seen documentaries like The Vow or Wild Wild Country or all these documentaries that are out there right now about abuses of power in these groups. So I didn't have that template. I had an uncomfortable feeling, but you
weren't immunized or vaccinated against it all. Yeah.
Yes. And I ultimately trusted Mark, who said, it's very weird the first couple of days. Day 3 is when things get really interesting, and stick it out. And I'd already paid, and there's non-refundable. So I overrode my gut instincts on many red flags from the beginning. The fact that every day we were bowing to Keith going, thank you, Vanguard, at the end of every class, that we were wearing sashes that were to denote the ranks, to start as a white sash. Well, it's just like martial arts. And also it was plugged into the curriculum that if you reacted to anything to do with the ranking system or the paying tribute, which is all Thank You Vanguard was, then you were a suppressive, and that you had, basically saying you're a bad person. So I was really uncomfortable with a lot of that. There was so much adulation towards Keith and to Nancy, Vanguard, and Prefect. but I also didn't want to be called out as being like not willing to pay tribute, because that just meant that I had authority issues and all this crap. So anyway, the red flags were easily glossed over by this concept that you're going to feel uncomfortable and you need to just ride through that, which now I know that in 3 days you can be fully indoctrinated into a new belief system, which is ultimately what happened.
But you describe these red flags, and I kind of get where you're coming from. It's called the sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? Where you think, well, I've given a bunch of money, or I've been in this group now since I was a child for decades. It can't be wrong. I won't allow it to be wrong, sort of thing. But those are still pretty significant red flags. And you presumably reached a point where you yourself were taking people, new members through this process of, don't quit, essentially. Absolutely. Did you ever find yourself saying that to people?
100%. We learned a process that's actually from sales that Keith taught us called feel, felt, found, which basically is, I know how you feel. I felt the same way, but what I found is, and that was totally genuinely true for me. I wasn't lying by any means. It was, I totally get it. I thought the 5-day was so weird at first, but what I found is when you understand what the meanings of the sashes are, and you just spend a little bit of time with us, you understand why we do what we do, and that meaning will change for you, and you'll find great value out of it. But, stuff like that. Feel, felt, found. You can do it with your kids too, by the way. I know you don't want to brush your teeth. I used to hate brushing my teeth too. What I found is if I brush my teeth every day, I don't have to go to the dentist. Like it's a way to lead.
I feel as though you're indoctrinating me and my viewers into this group now. So please stop.
I might. Lloyd, I know how you feel.
It's fascinating stuff. It really is. And so you wanted to take this to Vancouver, and you set up your own office that, you set up like a local branch for NXIVM in Vancouver.
Correct.
And, how successful were you? How many people joined?
At one point, we were very successful. I don't have the numbers on that because they locked me out of the system as soon as I became a defector. But I know personally, like in my what they called my organization, I personally brought about 100 people in. But those 100 people brought in people who brought in people in that group around the world. So some people I don't even know. We're about 2,000 people. So, but in the center in Vancouver, at any given time, we had anywhere between 100 to 200 students in the full-time program. There was like an ongoing program that we had there called Ethos. So it was pretty successful. It was always an uphill battle. Keith and Claire Bronfman kept changing the price of the curriculum and Keith kept changing
up or down.
Oh, way more expensive. They kept making it more expensive. And they would say, well, you just need to recruit a different type of person, Sarah. Stop recruiting starving artists. And like, all my friends are actors. Like, this is the community. I'm like, well, you need to look at businessmen then. And like basically saying it was, of course, my fault that I couldn't recruit. I also was at one point one of the top salespeople in the company. And I don't say that proudly, like to pump my own tires. I say that because it's one of the reasons why I've been so vocal on the other side, is I feel like because I was such an advocate, I need to be equally as loud in terms of shining light on these abuses, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. And when you say there were when you said 2,000, is that how many there were globally?
No, I mean, in terms of people who've ever taken curriculum ever in the whole community, it was less than 20, somewhere between 17 and 20,000. We don't have a definitive on that.
Sure.
I've heard 20 and I've heard 17. So let's just say 20,000. So when you think about it, the best technology to change the world, as we thought we had, only reached 20,000 people. It's not Indeed. A very successful group, for a similar.
I hope you don't mind me saying this. Yeah. Similar in numbers to Scientology, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
in terms of their reach.
I think Scientology had a broader reach at one point. I don't think anyone is joining now, thanks to people like Leah Remini and Mike Grinder and all the shows that are about. I don't think people are joining, but I don't know how many people are leaving. I don't have the numbers on that. But in terms of NXIVM, there's a handful of people left who, by the way, speaking of the sunk cost fallacy, the people who haven't left yet are really trying to get their money back in terms of, they've moved to Albany. They have nothing else to do, or moved to New York. And like, thank God, my husband and I, who I know you're interviewing next week, we had a life outside of NXIVM. and we had something to go back to. We had my family here. We had a support system. I never gave up my career fully. I mean, I didn't put a lot of energy into it for a decade, but the people who are still in are really screwed because they have nothing else.
Is it still possible to join NXIVM?
Not really. They're not running classes. I think they're trying to. Apparently, they're involved actually in another MLM, an insurance company. So they're got another pyramid thing going. Most of them, and are making money that way. So you can be recruited into that and probably get a little bit of head fuckery with that system, for lack of a better word.
No, that comes across loud and clear. So you, when you were in Vancouver and you say there were, roughly 100 or so, were these 100 kind of believers, talk me through what the structure looked like on like a daily or weekly basis. Was everyone meeting together in like one room, or were they splintering off into groups? And what was the kind of schedule like on a weekly basis?
Sure. Most people got involved first by taking what was called a 5-day, which is a 5-day training. So 5 full days of about 25 modules. So a lot of classwork, very condensed. I think it was very condensed therapy, which is one of the things I liked about it, because I don't sit still very well. I like to just get things done, and I liked how efficient it was. So after that, people would either decide to finish that training in an 11-day, so another 11-day condensed thing, which would happen a couple months down the road, or they would join Ethos, which was an ongoing kind of like a gym membership. And I think when we closed down, we had it's a bit of a blur now, 3 classes a week, 3 to 5 classes a week, maybe. A couple we had a couple during the week and then a few on the weekend. So people could come take a 2-hour class on a given subject. And in our center in downtown Vancouver, we had 3 training rooms. So people would come, we'd do the opening, we'd do announcements, and we'd go into the different rooms, and they'd run 3 different classes run by 3 different proctors or coaches. And there'd be goals. There's 3 types of classes: emotional classes, philosophical classes, and practical. And you could take the practical would be about goal setting. Emotions would be about how to change your emotions so you'd be more at cause with them, so you could feel whatever you wanted at any given time. And the philosophical are more about the belief system, understanding morality, good and bad, right and wrong, things like that.
And how insular was all of this? Was it telling people? I mean, you mentioned right at the beginning they were saying, don't quit, but was it encouraging people to kind of sever ties with the outside world or with unbelieving family, or to be suspicious, regarding people who were criticizing the group?
It was a bit of it was a little bit more tacit than what I think happened in JW. Like you couldn't completely cut out from the outside world, because I wanted you to recruit people. So you had to be out there. But generally, if there was somebody in your life who was against you or thought that Keith was bad in any way, we were encouraged to not put energy into that relationship. And we were encouraged to shun people who left in a destructive way. So people would come and go, people would take classes and they'd leave. But if they left on good terms, it would be fine. I did get feedback later from my friends who felt like when they, they came to classes and they left, that they felt that because they weren't in class, they felt like I wasn't their friend anymore. I personally didn't feel like I was shunning them. They weren't in my circle, and I was really busy is more what it was for me. Yeah. But if people left and were assholes when they left, or were saying anything negative about Keith, then we were instructed to shun them. So there was a group of people that left in 2009, also known as the NXIVM 9. Also would be great for your interviewer, for your channel. That group of women left and tried to change things in the company. And then we were told that they were extorting money. Turned out they were not extorting money. They were just asking for the money owed, which is the same thing that happened to me when I left. I'm like, okay, I'm leaving. This is what I'm owed. And then they told the community that I was, stealing, that I was extorting. They tried to get me arrested on totally trumped up charges. It was crazy. So I'd already been through that on the other side, with a group of people leaving and saying, crying foul, and then being shunned. So I knew what to expect when I left, that I would be shunned and cut off from the community, which I was.
Fascinating.
Sorry, I jumped to the end, but go.
No, there's so much, so many things to unpack there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, basically, when you get involved in NXIVM, or when you got involved in NXIVM, it sounds like very much a case of, handing over money, and you describe that being the case for you to the point where you were owed money when you were leaving, but you're also describing kind of committing a lot of time on a weekly basis to this group.
Oh, yeah.
Were you salaried in any way for this work?
Oh, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. What I just described in terms of the classes, that was what a student would do. For me, I became a proctor, and then I became a senior proctor. At every stage of advancement, there's different monetary compensation. So it took me about 4 years to get to proctor. And at that point, when you become proctor, you earn 10% of whoever you bring in. You earn a salary for teaching. So you earn it if I taught a class, I would make, depending on how many students were there, anywhere between $10 and $50, like not a lot of money for teaching. Where I made really good money down the road is when I became what's called a field trainer. So when I opened Vancouver and was basically selling trainings and filling classes, I was compensated very well for that. But I was one of the few people who was able to do that. And that's why I became a poster child. They used my success because I was a networker and I'm a hustler. Like I've always been that way, and whatever I'm passionate about, I announce from the rooftop, even things like Yanya's book, I don't get compensation from that, but I love her book and I tell everybody about it. So for me, and they would say this all the time in public, they'd say, if we had more Sarah Edmondsons, our company would thrive, because I was so vocal about, how much I love NXIVM. So yeah, I was compensated to recruit and I was compensated to teach. There were other paths where you could get paid, like you could get paid as a therapist for doing one-on-one sessions, which in that path, they kept changing the bar of what you needed to do to be able to do that and get paid. And at a certain point, I was like, I'm not going to do that, because I could see, even though I wasn't vocal about it, that it wasn't doable. This wasn't feasible. They kept changing the standards and we had to pay. So yes, I was making money, but we also paid a lot of money to take the training. As a leader, it was mandatory to take trainings, and those trainings cost anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000.
Oh, so you were paid money, but you're also paying money.
Yes. Yeah.
Was there a profit margin by any chance, or was it like break even?
There was a couple of years in the middle where I made some profit, but generally, like big picture, I have very little to show for it, because for the first 4 years, I wasn't paid as a proctor. Basically, it's an internship. And that's one of the things that Keith got in trouble for initially at the end was forced labor. And he broke a lot of labor laws. And it's similar with other large group awareness trainings, which is what NXIVM falls under, like other like Landmark and other groups like that, where they're personal development. People are often giving their time for free as volunteers. And that's where often leaders or groups can get in trouble, because they should be getting paid. Well,
yeah, it's kind of a bare minimum really when you do work, is that you receive something in exchange for it. When you talk about Keith, you're obviously talking about, is it Keith Raniere? Raniere, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
How close were you to him? How often would you sort of see him sort of on a monthly basis, maybe?
Oh, no. I lived in Vancouver. So I still live in Vancouver. My trips to Albany changed depending on what rank I was. There was a point towards the end where I was probably going at least once a quarter, sometimes more. We went at least 3 times a year for coach summits or retreats where we'd get together with all the upper ranks. I was not close to Keith. I somehow had some intuitive thing inside me that kept him at arm's length. Thank goodness. I always thought he was in person kind of, schlubby and unimpressive as a person, but I really respected his mind, because I thought that he had built this technology, this curriculum. I've since learned that he stole it from many other modalities. So I respected him, but the women around him would often encourage me to reach out to him to see if he would go for a walk, which is how he spent one-on-one time with one-on-one time with people. And I did that twice in my 12 years. I was alone with him twice. And it was always very awkward. It felt like he couldn't figure out his inroad to me that would somehow crack me or get me more close to him. I missed those signals. I didn't jump. I didn't bite, I guess is what I can say. So I kept him at a distance and never let him into my bubble of safety, or
your bubble of trust.
My bubble of trust. Yeah.
Well, God. Twice in 12 years is still a lot more than I got to meet the governing body. So okay. That's at least something. I mean, I think one of the kind of things that kept me in the thrall of the organization for as long as I was at Jehovah's Witnesses, because I had this idea of who the leaders were that was completely different to who they are. And right. We're seeing more of who they are now because they're making videos all the time. And the trouble with being a cult leader, a narcissistic cult leader who's also a bumbling buffoon, is it's hard to hide the fact that you're a bumbling buffoon when you're making propaganda videos all the time. Right. And so, my knowledge now of who the leaders are is completely different from how it was when I was inside, and we didn't really see many videos of them. And I just had this impression in my mind of them being these kind of ultra wise kind of sages who were just brimming with profound wisdom.
Right. And I'm guessing that's based on what other people told you about them.
Well, yeah, and indeed in their own literature that they were yes. writing. Yeah. It very much led you along that path. But if I'd ever been in a position to meet them, that would have been like amazing, and I would have had certain expectations. So it's interesting that you were coming face to face with your vanguard. Did you have to call him vanguard, by the way, to his face?
If it was in a school setting, yes. If it right. was casually outside, like going for a walk, I would call him Keith. Some people called him V. That was the more casual version of vanguard, speaking of sci-fi. And there was some towards the end when I was a green. Now keep in mind, there were somewhere between like 12 and 14 greens when I left. And the green meetings was as upper rank as you could get. There was one blue.
What is a green?
Green, the sashes. So
okay, got it.
White is student, yellow is coach, orange is proctor, and green is senior proctor. So above that was one blue counselor who was retired and two purple sashes who had mysteriously passed away from cancer. So separate story, we'll bookmark that. So the green meeting, I know. The green meeting was 12 of us, or 13. I have to go back and count, but it doesn't matter. A small group. And Keith would come in and give us a download of whatever we were supposed to do for the summit. Like we were the leaders. I was like part of that group, but in that group, there was also, I was the lowest ranking of those groups because there were stripes on the green. I was a 0 striped green.
You weren't a very stripy green. Okay.
Not a stripy green. And there are other people that were 4 stripes. So they outranked me. Anyway, all of this to say, when Keith came in, oftentimes he would be coming in and berating us for not doing our job or for making us feel shitty because we're all being entitled or whatever he was doing socially. Like we would spend time together. One time we all went to Fiji before that one purple sash passed away, who turned out to be his life partner, which was very confusing to me because I'd been told he was celibate. So I thought, is he celibate with his life partner? What is this, like an assistant life partner? I don't understand this relationship. So we went to Fiji with Pam and basically like 20 people of his inner circle. And that was the first time I'd ever hung out with him just socially, like eating dinner and, going for a boat ride or sitting on the beach. We'd never done anything like that. We'd always been in trainings or working in meetings. So, and I found him and Nippy off, and you can ask him more about this next week. He was very juvenile. He was very felt like very frat boy, making like sexual innuendos. And you can see some of that in The Vow. I don't know if you've seen The Vow on HBO.
Not yet. I intend to.
You have to see The Vow. You're going to wish we did this all over again because you'd have all sorts of different questions.
Well, yeah, there's my inroad. There's my inroad for part 2. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And also just to be clear, I want you on my podcast also.
That I would be honored. Thank you. Yeah.
We don't have a JW episode yet, and
we need to fix that.
We need to fix that. And people write us weekly saying, "When are you going to talk about JW? When are you going to talk about Mormonism? When are you going to talk about the yoga world?" I'm like, I got one lined up. Just wait.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I digress. Next.
You were in Fiji, and he was making innuendos.
He was just really inappropriate, and I'd never seen that side of him because I did revere him.
Wow.
He was charismatic, and he was really good at mimicking facially and in his tonality the sound of somebody who's wise. I tried to do it just there. I don't know if I did, but it was like his way of speaking was very magnetic, I guess. And if he said something that didn't make sense, which he often did, a term I now know as word salad, I thought that I didn't understand.
It's your fault for not being smart enough. Yeah,
exactly.
Wow. Well, it just seems so counterproductive if you have, like, as you say, like 20, let's say only 20 people in the world who are kind of the apex of your organization, and you're treating them like crap. Surely, in order for them to be successful in recruiting other people into the group, they're going to have a positive experience about what the leadership represents, and you're not giving them a positive experience if you're constantly berating them. That just seems to me to be such an obviously flawed way of leading an organization.
It looks that way to me as well. I would say that for the people that are in it and still believe in Keith, they believe it's similar to an abusive relationship, that he was doing that for their own good, and that it was tough, a tough love type of situation. And I had that. That was done very little to me. In many ways, I feel like they kind of left me alone because I was such a good recruiter. So I didn't get the brunt of that type of abuse, except a little bit at the end with Lauren, the person who brought me into I'm skipping ahead, sorry, to the women's only group part of the situation. And she was awful to me once. And I was like, what? This was supposed to be a mentorship. And she said, well, can't you see I'm doing this because I love you? Like, I'm always doing it out of care. And, I'd heard about that in abusive relationships. I'd never had it done to me. And I couldn't quite figure out how to, get out of that until I did, obviously not long after that exchange.
So this fraternity was DOS, was it?
Yeah, sorority technically. But
sorority, sorry, yeah.
It's okay.
Getting my words mixed up. Yeah. So this sorority was DOS, and we spoke a little bit off air earlier, and just to leap ahead in the story, tell me about kind of on the other side of this experience when you ran into a fellow ex-Jehovah's Witness. And shared a little bit about your story with her.
Yeah. So the long and short of it, and I tend to not want to go into the details about this part anymore because it is still triggering, but I joined the sorority, and part of being initiated into the sorority was getting a tattoo, which ended up being a brand done without anesthetic in my pelvic region, like right under my underwear line. And it was a horrific thing in itself, but found out later that the symbol which was withheld from us, the true meaning was actually Keith's initials in a monogram. And this was eventually what woke me up and initiated the cascade of wanting to be public and tell the world and take this motherfucker down and all that stuff. Anyway, cut to one of my first big TV interviews was for A&E's Cults and Extreme Beliefs. And they had myself and 3 or 4 other survivors of other groups. And one of them was Romy from JW. And they had us sitting in the makeup chair. And they said, don't talk because we want to have this conversation on camera. So we're sitting there beside each other, being like, hi, like I'm Sarah, like I'm Romy. And I pulled her into the bathroom because I knew that I wasn't going to show the brand on camera. And I said, I just want to show you something so you know what I'm referring to when we talk. And I showed her. And she looked at me and she said, I'm so sorry that they did that to you. And she gave me a big hug. And we both cried. And she told me a little bit about the abuses that had been done to her, which were horrific. And by the way, like so much worse than what happened to me.
I've had Romy on the channel. So yeah, viewers will be aware of what her story is. But wow, yeah. So you guys were able to come together and compare notes. Yeah.
And I realized then that people who've been through some sort of cultic abuse or abuse of any kind don't judge, and they don't say, well, why didn't you just walk out of the room? Or how could you have said yes to that? Because they understand the years of indoctrination that take place for me to even say that. And there's a video out there of me going, Master, would you brand me? It would be an honor. Which,
wow.
And there's also audio footage that was used in the trial of Keith telling the women leaders to say, tell them to ask for the brand so that it appears consensual. So this is one of the things that got him in trouble in the end, is that he recorded every conversation because he was a narcissist and was making
it was
library.
So premeditated by the sounds of things. He really totally thought this through. Yeah,
he thought it through. He said he pretended that he had nothing to do with it, and the women who recruited, there was basically 8 women around him were the top line women underneath him, and all of them were having relationships with him. They're all part of his harem. And then he basically collateralized those women. In other words, used the blackmail that he had on them to go get other women, and they had to get 6 women each. And I was one of those 6 women under Lauren. And so those women lied to us systematically, saying this is a symbol for the elements, and it's a symbol of your strength, and you're going to go through it without anesthetic so that you feel pain, and pain is love, and love is character, like all the things that we learned, which is total bullshit now, but that was part of our indoctrination and our belief system. So when it came time to doing it and getting up on that table, I had years of, and this is what's brilliant about gaslighting. Now I had the gaslighting voice in my head saying, if you don't do it, you're weak. If you don't do this, then you're letting everybody down. This is what the leadership has to do. They have to go through this pain and lead by example, all this stuff. So needless to say, it was a horrific experience, but ultimately it's what woke me up to what was actually going on in the group on a big picture. Because abuses have been going on in NXIVM for years behind closed doors. And people have actually tried to get out and tell people, but no one had ever done that successfully, because emotional abuse is very hard to pinpoint. And physical abuse is much easier to pinpoint, which is why I showed the world.
I'm just so glad that you had Romy with you, and you were able to have that experience, because like you say, to an outsider, someone who's never had any experience whatsoever in a cult, they could be very kind of dismissive and say, well, there's no way I would let someone do that to me. And how could you possibly, agree to that? Whereas someone like Romy, or someone like, myself, or anyone basically who's been in a cult, understands what it means to not be in full control of your mind.
Yeah.
And this is what these groups do through very, very clever, sophisticated methods, which it sounds like Keith was expert at. They managed to subvert your will. And so, it's sad in a way that it came to that point before you could wake up, but at least you did wake up. And when you did wake up, you gave them hell, didn't you?
Yes.
Talk us through, the ways that you kind of highlighted and exposed these issues.
Sure. And, the wake up process is actually, it didn't happen in one particular thing. There were a number of things that happened slowly over time. Ultimately, it was finding out that it was his initials that it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
So immediately after the branding, you were still compliant.
I was still indoctrinated. I didn't, I actually thought that I'd done something really brave. I was proud of myself that I'd gone through this, and I wanted to tell my husband how strong I was, who was always, teasing me for my workouts. They're not, real workouts. He did commend me in my childbirthing twice, which was, but it's like, he's a real, and I would be like, I did this without anesthetic. I was proud of myself. It was, but that didn't wake me up. No, it was one of the things. It was a crack. It was a seed that was planted. A number of things happened. And I'm a little plug for my book. This is, I think, the best part of my book, where, in terms of, by best, I mean exciting, where I woke
Sarah,
up.
I'm going to have to reprimand you there. But you didn't hold your book up long enough. Sorry. You need to hold it up much longer than that.
And I'm covering this up, by the way. I'm covering up my scar because I've since had it removed, and I'm
There's
really
true
proud
story
of
of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. So
Yes.
please, viewers, do check that out, and there will be a link in the description. Thank you. Yeah.
And I did narrate the Audible version, which is kind of cool because I'm a voiceover artist and I got to narrate my own book. But
it would be wrong if you didn't.
Yes, I know. I know. They were like, should we audition people? I'm like, no, I can do that because I know what I'm talking about. Thank you, though. So waking up, there was a series of things that happened, but ultimately it went from being, okay, we have to get out, to being, oh my God, DOS had recruited all of these women that were my friends, and my entire coaching staff, save for, a handful of women, had been invited into this women's group, had given nude photos, really damaging, dangerous information for other people to hold over you. And I went from being like, okay, I've got to get out, to like, okay, I got to free the slaves, free the women. And then they kind of forced my hand in a way, because they started to threaten me and come after me for these trumped up charges. A lot of things happened in a very short period of time, but what I very soon recognized was that this had to be exposed. And I felt very responsible, because a lot of those women, including some that are still in, I had brought in, I had introduced to the company. So I was on a mission to expose Keith. And the first thing we did, first we went to the local law enforcement and to the local FBI, who couldn't make sense of it. And basically what we understand now is we didn't really get to the right person, too low level. They didn't do anything about it. We're looking into it. And ultimately we decided to go to the press, and we did an article with the New York Times, which initiated an investigation from a different district than the district I had gone to originally, which it also seems like, although this hasn't been proven yet, that there was some, the wheels had been greased in that district.
A little bit of corruption, maybe.
Yeah. And that's notoriously, from what I've heard, a corrupt district in New York. So different district, the Eastern District, and these two powerhouse women, who I'm hoping to have on my podcast as well, basically prosecuted him and got the FBI involved and had him arrested within the year. And then the following year had him on a 6-week trial, and he was convicted on every count, which I don't know off the top of my head, but includes sex trafficking and forced labor and all sorts of criminal activities. Is basically, he was running a, they got him for RICO ultimately. And there's no specific laws, as far as I know, regarding cults, but it's a criminal enterprise based on the series of things he was doing. And they didn't even get into the other things like tax evasion and the mysterious deaths, which is another whole other thing. But
I'm gonna have to drag you back to those mysterious deaths. But
yeah.
So is he in prison now?
For 120 years.
And he's still able to maintain a following, even though he's a convicted felon.
Yeah, it's for the people involved. And listen, I kind of like have empathy for them, because I was in this mindset for many years, which is that we believe that we were part of this noble humanitarian group, which was going to have the world push back, because they didn't understand the nobility and the goodness of Keith. Because there was always press about how awful he was. I just didn't believe it. Most of it I didn't even read. So I know that a lot of people that are still loyal haven't even read the transcripts from the trial. Those who've read the transcript, there's some people who did attend the trial and basically decided that all the women are lying, and that this is basically a conspiracy to take down Keith, which I don't know why we would do that, but they have to ignore a lot of people's pain and trauma to maintain. It's cognitive dissonance. They have to maintain their belief system, and otherwise they'd have to admit that they've made a huge mistake, and that's just too hard.
It's kind of sobering to think that even if the Jehovah's Witness leaders were prosecuted, which they should be for covering up child sex abuse, it's kind of sobering to think that even if they went to jail, they could still conceivably maintain a following, because that's exactly the narrative that Jehovah's Witnesses hear, that the media, Satan's system's out to get them, and don't believe apostate lies, and so on and so forth. Right. When you exited the group, it seems that you had like a dual purpose. One, to, hold Keith accountable for what he did to you and for what he was doing to other women. And second of all, to, as you say, rescue people and get people out. Now, that is a notoriously hard thing to do, just because you have had this, realization, which it took a while, even after the brand, not a while necessarily after the branding, but even after being branded, you didn't necessarily know that this was a cult. Mm-hmm. That's really hard to just kind of go out and say, I'm going to wake people up when they're not at that place in their journey. So talk us through how well that went.
There was different stages. The first stage happened where I wasn't at first telling people about the branding because I had given collateral as a vow of secrecy. So I was trying to let people know without giving that secret away. And for many people, especially those in Vancouver, I just abruptly quit. Now understand, the center was mine. I was the leader of it. And for me to say, I can't get into it, but I'm leaving, was what most people, I'd say 95% of the people were like, well, if Sarah and Nippy, my husband, are leaving, I'm leaving. If there's something's bad, something's happened and that's causing them to quit, like, that's all I need to know, because they believed in us and they trusted in us. Then there was a group of people who were more, they wanted the data, which is an ESP word, get the data. So I would okay, I'll show you the data. And then I showed them the scar. This is once they knew that I was a defector, because there was a period of time where they didn't know, and I was playing both sides, and I was trying to extract myself and let people know before they knew I was defecting, because as soon as I became a defector, I'd be a suppressive, right? So I had to get people out without the leadership knowing that I was doing that. And then eventually that cover was blown, which, by the way, sidebar, there's a British podcast called True Spies, with Vanessa Kirby narrating with her incredible British accent. And that goes into very specific detail about this espionage nature of my extraction, which I'll save that for another time. But I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. So letting people know and showing them the brand, that was the next stage. And then there was the group of people, like in Vancouver, everyone's awake, knows it's a cult, totally woken up, except for, I'd say, maybe 3 people. One of them's branded, and one of them's about to get married to her sister. So these are people who are still invested, can't see the forest for the trees. And their belief is, well, it's a group of women who decide, they don't necessarily agree in the branding, but they don't think it's illegal. And they think, well, sororities, they brand each other, and they can't step back enough to look at how unethical it is that a man came up with this women's only empowerment group and tricked women into putting his initials on their bodies. When did we go from working on our goals to branding women? There should be no place in a personal development program where that's acceptable, ever. Even if we did consent, which we didn't.
Well, that goes without saying. Mm-hmm. It sounds like, from what you're describing, you'd risen so high in the organization, mm-hmm. that, when you were trying to influence people to get out, your words had meaning, probably to an extent that Keith's didn't.
Yes.
And also you were able to kind of play the system a little bit. There is an example of a high profile defection in Jehovah's Witness history, Ray Franz, a governing body member who resigned and then eventually ended up publishing a book exposing the organization. But he wasn't really around enough as a governing body member, mm-hmm. Awake to the kind of corruption and the evil. And he wasn't therefore able to kind of wield any real influence while still inside. It sounds like you knew the system well enough and you were wily enough to think, what can I do? How can I play this situation? And so, credit to you for,
Thank you.
Using your head in that situation.
Thank you. And to be honest, I did not have much of a head about me at that time because I was in such trauma. It was a real head fuck to realize that I'd been a part of something so bad for so long and I'd missed all the red flags, or overridden the red flags, and that this was going on behind closed doors. And I was out there vouching for this guy. Meanwhile, he was doing all these horrendous things, mostly to women, but to men too. But just to answer your question about getting people out, I'm still doing it. It's 3 years later, and who I'm talking to the most now, Nippy and I play this game called Who's Going to Call Us Next to Apologize? Because the people that stayed in were really good friends. These are people that were at our wedding, and slowly, one by one, especially after the trial, when the trial came out and people read the transcripts, they called and they said, listen, I'm sorry. People who didn't even call us when we left because the leadership said you can't call them because we're trying to destroy the company, which we were. We were trying to destroy the company. We wanted to expose what was going on. So those people are now calling us, and I'm still, recommending Yanya's book and some other books that are really helpful. Still trying to get people the information they need, but there's a handful of people that may never wake up, and my therapist now is trying to get me to let go of that, because I don't want to give up, but
you want to account for every last one.
Yeah, I want to count for every last one. I was actually on Leah Remini's podcast, and I heard her talking to Mark, who brought me in, saying to Mark, Mark, it might be better if they don't wake up, because that's a tough thing to come back from, to have sat through all of that evidence and all that entire trial, and they're still active. Like, they have a whole website. I'm not going to even tell you what it is, because I want to draw more attention to their platform, but which, because it's not good for them. They need to, they don't need more attention. They need time alone in the woods to reconcile their delusion, which is something that we had to do already, right? Like, you, I'm sure, had to do that too. You had to reconcile how you were a part of that.
But you've actually hit on a really interesting question. Under what circumstances shouldn't someone wake up from a cult? And I can think of two off the top of my head. I think, not many people agree with me on this, but I've experienced enough evil in my life. When I say evil, I mean people deliberately doing the wrong thing, knowing that it's going to hurt other people just because it benefits them. And right. Probably Keith's a great example of that.
Yeah.
So I've experienced enough evil people in my life to know that they're out there. And I think evil people probably deserve it, probably deserve to be in a cult. At least to some degree, their behavior is being controlled. I mean, who knows, if they weren't in a cult, maybe their behavior would be even more psychotic and even more damaging. Mm-hmm. And second of all, you're probably aware of the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses prohibit blood transfusions.
Right.
And so you can conceivably have a situation where two parents will deny their child a blood transfusion, even though their child is too young to understand what the hell's going on. And that child dies. Not because of its beliefs, because it's a child, it doesn't have any, but because of the parents' beliefs.
Right.
And I did a video on the martyrdom of Jared Scepter, because Jared Scepter was a child whose story featured in the propaganda. In other words, they were proud of his death. They were proud of the fact that this kid was dead because the parents stuck to their guns. And they were saying, isn't it wonderful how his parents are now circuit overseer and circuit overseer's wife, and they were blessed in their careers within the organization. So I think it would actually be detrimental if they woke up and they realized that they killed their child. That would be...
They might kill themselves if they had that recognition.
Quite conceivably, yes.
Yeah.
So there are some situations where probably people do need to stay inside. Yeah. And now that we've gone down that very dark alleyway, you need to tell me about these blue and purple sashes.
Yeah, well, the blue retired, so he's still loyal to Keith, as far as I can tell. He brought ESP to Mexico. He was kind of like the Tony Robbins of Mexico, and then he switched gears and brought ESP to Mexico. He did really well and had
Did we just mention Tony Robbins in a cult context? That's interesting.
Maybe. By that, I meant he used to run a personal development program and then joined NXIVM. So he already had a network, and then he brought NXIVM to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he was making, I heard, this is a rumor, like $60K a month because of the amount of people that he had, and he was getting 10% and in some cases 20%. And anyway, the two purple sashes were two women who were with Keith from the beginning. And I've, since leaving, I've read other people's books and researched so much more than what I knew at the time. But he essentially had a polyamorous relationship with a circle of women that we now refer to as the harem. And he was with Pam and Barbara since before even NXIVM. And what it appears to be, and this is speculation, I don't have proof of this, but as he got older, he was getting rid of the older women and making room for the younger women in his harem. And the older women, I do not think, approved of some of his choices, never would have approved of Doss. And so when they both got cancer very suddenly and died very quickly, despite the fact that they were very healthy, athletic, kombucha drinking, green juice drinking, vitamin inhaling, It's
And you
similar to
don't
me.
usually die of cancer simultaneously. That alone is rather suspicious, isn't it?
Yeah, within a couple of years of each other. And in that group of women, many of the leadership had cancer, and some of them, you know, got through it and got better. But when I had left, I counted 9 cases, and I had thought at the time that there was something in the water in that area, and was even researching industrial, you know, toxic leaks and stuff like that.
Carcinogens and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether they were being poisoned or whether it was simply, I also believe in a mind-body connection. And I think when your body is under stress and you're breaching your own ethics, because I think these women somewhere knew this wasn't right, that triggers a fight or flight response and a lot of cortisol, stress, cancer. Like there's a lot of correlations. I don't know if he was actually poisoning them or if he was just ethically destroying them. I don't know.
Interesting.
Something for somebody to investigate.
Absolutely. We've planted a flag firmly there.
Yes.
And maybe someone will pick up the baton and investigate that.
My fight is done. I mean, I'm winding this chapter up. Our podcast is less about NXIVM and more about abuses of power in general, which is why we want to speak to you eventually. And we're looking at a number of different groups that part, like he's in jail for 120 years. That war is over for me in terms of that fight.
You feel you have closure on this experience?
Yeah. I mean, not full closure because the other women around him haven't been sentenced yet, but that should happen within the year, I hope.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just filled with admiration that you've, taken this negative and turned it into a positive and I think, I'm sure you realize that you shouldn't be blaming yourself for the people you recruited in. You thought you were doing them a favor at the time. Yes. But even so, it's incredibly admirable that you've exerted so much time and energy using your platform and using your talents really to pursue this. So well done. And if anyone's watching this, and usually what I say to guests, because they're ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, what would you say to a Jehovah's Witness watching this? So I guess in your case, it's a case of saying, what would you say to someone who is in an abusive group who is beginning to question whether they should stay in? What would be your message to them?
Trust your gut. And if you're having doubts, don't go to the leadership. Go to people who've already left and ask them why they left. And don't be afraid to get that information because it will shine a light. And if you're feeling that doubt, if you go to the leadership, they're just going to tell you that you're wrong, you're crazy, or they'll punish you. Where there's smoke, there's fire. That's what I've learned. It's how an organization deals with defectors is a really telling indication of if they're a cult or a culty or a destructive group or not. And shunning, by the way, is never a humanitarian way of dealing with somebody else having a different belief. Somebody wants to leave your group, why would you shun them? That's just cruel. That's not kind. It's not in the Bible, I'm sure. Well
said. And yes, once again, well done for fighting so successfully. I mean, you won, basically.
It was a blowout, as Nippy says.
It's inspiring to see, and hopefully we can learn some lessons from your tenacity in going after this group. Viewers, please do check out the links in the description, which will take you to Sarah's book and to her podcast and various other resources. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. And I look forward to you chatting on our podcast when the time's right.
Let's do it. So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.